Hi. If you're looking at this, you may have received one of these door hangers. We've started distributing these, and they have some bullet points that we provide a QR code on the back to this video with respect to. And so I'm just going to give you a little more detail on each of these. These are commitments we're making as a campaign. The first, a plan to grow wealth and create businesses and jobs in all our neighborhoods. The second, a public safety plan to stop the violence. The third, an action plan to address the housing emergency in our communities. And finally, maximum public voice in decisions. So, when we talk about local economy, it is often the case that, especially on the south and west sides, any development is framed as some sort of a gift that we should be grateful that people are spending money in our communities. We are on the South Lakefront. We are on the South Lakefront of Chicago. This is some of the most desirable real estate in the city, and yet we keep getting this sort of con presented to us like it's really hard to get people to build here. It's not hard to get people to build here, and if we're not demanding maximum investment from those people who are seeking access, we end up on the short end of the stick, and that in fact is what has been happening historically. So without an expectation of a quality outcome, not just in terms of the product itself, but the process, the way things are built, we end up with people really feeling like they don't have to make as substantial a commitment here as they make in other places, and the consequences are pretty obvious. So talking about the economy, I want to just make mention of where we are now, because I think there's a big picture statement that we should all be talking about. Um, as a result of the pandemic, which is not our fault at all. We had a response that came from the governor down, which was an appropriate response. It was correct, which was to shut down essentially the economy in the state for the sake of minimizing fatalities. It was a good decision, but there are consequences. We created the economic crisis that we're now seeing the implications of. The idea that these things come and go in the course of a year or 2 years is just not realistic. And by mandating that lots and lots of people who didn't have sort of unlimited assets to allow them to ride out a couple of years of not working, not have jobs, by making that something that was absolutely forced on people, elected officials have an obligation to continue to work with those people as long as it takes to get us back into equilibrium. And we're not there yet. We are nowhere near there yet. So we've got to deal with unemployment. I think of all of the economic challenges we have, I want to start with unemployment and say there's plenty of opportunity for us to get our community up to full or near full employment. I've seen a lot of unemployment numbers. I think the ones that hover around 15% are fairly consistent with my experience in the communities at minimum. There are some lower than that, and I think they're absolutely incorrect. Higher than that may be true, and that gets into the complexities of measuring unemployment. But let's use 15% as a number, the people that you most typically associate with working a full-time job. So older than high school, younger than retirement age, we get to a number around 3,800, 4,000 people. And if you multiply that by even part-time jobs, let's say that we give everyone 20 hours of work in a week for under $100 million, we could have 100%, if not full employment, everybody working and getting a paycheck at minimum wage, which is $15.40 an hour right now in Chicago. And that would dramatically change our economy. It would have tremendously positive effects. And for $100 million, it's just important in terms of keeping this in context, we would have a year of employment versus a subsidy for something like the 78. The 78 is getting $1.6 billion already committed in order to build this very fancy upscale development on the north side. $1.6 billion basically translates into 16 years of this full employment in our ward, or in any ward, or across 16 wards, a year of full employment. And if you think about how to capture some of that additional revenue to keep economic opportunity happening, you're really creating something pretty dynamic. I use that as an illustration to say that we can get to a much higher rate of employment if that's where we put our priorities and if that's where the political will is, and for me, that's what I will be committed to, and that's what I'll push for, is creating opportunity for people locally so that we get to that, close to a near zero. I think almost everybody who's able to work wants to work. I think we make sure that everybody who is able to work and who wants to work has an employment opportunity. It is unconscionable to me that that's not how we operate. We can similarly be creative around creating new retail opportunities, other commercial development. I think we've got to mandate that anybody building in the community has just a very, very high rate of local employment. That's something that doesn't happen now at all. So that's the kind of thing in terms of economic opportunity that I believe we can push for. Talking about public safety, which is on the minds of a lot of people, I really want to immediately say that one of the reasons I'm focusing on employment right now when I talk about economic opportunity is it is directly connected to the level of violence in our communities. People do not have work. Some people have been struggling since the beginning of the pandemic. Some, of course, even before that, but have been pushed further as a result of not being able to work over the last couple of years. And it's no coincidence that we see, for example, in South Shore, the highest eviction rates in the city, and then we also see, unfortunately, the highest homicide rate in the city. There are a number of solid studies that show a relationship between employment and property crime and violent crime, and it's just common sense. It's not all economics, though, and for sure, the police have to play a role in any public safety solution. The police have to play a role. I mean, there's just no question about that. It's not just about employment and economics. However, we really have to face facts when it comes to our police department and working with the police. First of all, the level of abuse that happens in our communities is outrageous, and we have to be addressing that even as we're thinking about how the police might be a part of a solution. I know there are some people who think there is no place for the police in our neighborhoods. However, there are also lots of other people who want to see a police presence, and I think it is very important to a public safety plan that people feel safe when they're deliberating and talking together about what should happen. And I recognize and appreciate that there is a very serious critique that can be leveled against the police department. But I think that the idea that we eliminate the police as part of any sort of strategy, first of all, ignores a whole bunch of people who disagree with that. But secondly, it's a much more complicated proposition to say we're not going to do anything with the police. We're going to come up with our own plan, and you can't stop the police from policing. So they're going to be present. If they haven't been engaged, that's deeply problematic. So let's talk about what a police role could be like. I want to say, first of all, that we're not getting the results, not just in terms of the most egregious behavior by police, but just the day-to-day productivity that you would expect from any kind of a public safety organization. So for the last 20 years, we have given the Chicago Police Department more money every year. It goes up. We have record-breaking police budgets at this point. Also, for the last 20 years, the arrest rates by CPD have gone down and down. You hear about points of crisis where people wonder if the police are doing less, almost like intentionally as kind of a soft strike. But the fact of the matter is that's not unique circumstance. That's all the time, always happening with the police. They're doing less and less. So we need to be smarter about how we're budgeting because we're rewarding basically less productivity. And we need to connect that funding to performance. It's just how we have to handle policing in the 21st century. And I think we have to take a serious look at a police budget that eats up so many resources, and when we don't have resources for other services that could provide solutions and de-escalate violence. And this gets into the idea of treatment, not trauma, which is a terrific movement in Chicago, something I support 100%. We should be devoting more money, and when emergency calls are coming in, we should be directing more calls to other agencies, other professionals who are better at de-escalation, who are better at addressing mental health issues, who know how to handle these problems. So that's a critical part of public safety as well. The last, I think, any public safety plan, the last element, and it's not last because it's least important. It's I want to kind of end on this as a point of emphasis. There are so many things people in the community do that reduce violence, and in some cases, they are anti-violence programs, and they need robust funding. We fund at a fraction of what we should be funding when it comes to people trying to solve violence or mitigate violence. Beyond that, we've got lots of programs in not just the Fifth Ward, but across the city. But focusing on the Fifth Ward, we have lots of programs that have a central point that's about, just improving life in the community. And it has a parallel effect of making the community safer. This is especially true of anything that draws people out into public space, whether it's performances or workshops or creative activities, tours of the neighborhoods. All of that has the effect of having more people circulating through outside. That always has the positive consequence of making predators less comfortable in our neighborhood. So all of that needs much more support from the aldermen and from the city. And then there are things like, community gardens almost are talked about too much about in terms of having this effect. But you've got to mention it. Spaces like the South Merrill Community Garden, which is like an oasis in a part of the South Shore that unfortunately has seen so much violence. This is a beautiful, safe space that, first of all, has to be, as much as possible protected and encouraged and funded, but also has that effect where there's less activity there, there's less violent activity there than to the east, the west, the north, or the south. And that's no coincidence. And that happens all over our neighborhoods. The 65th and Woodlawn Community Garden similarly has a sort of low crime footprint around it. And you can just name one after the other in our neighborhoods, in the Fifth Ward, but also in the whole neighborhoods. All of the parts of the neighborhoods that we have a piece of in five. So that's critically important. Now, getting to housing. Housing, first of all, you can see how there are these sort of interrelationships with these topics. Our housing emergency is positively impacted, without a question, by economic improvement. So if people have more resources, they're not going to fall behind as soon or be as likely to fall behind. Beyond that, again, we think about the environment that we've just come out of, and to some extent we're still struggling with, in terms of the economic crisis that the pandemic triggered. And we've got to work with people who are behind on rent, who are behind on their mortgage, who are struggling economically in other ways. This is a legacy that anybody who wants to become a public official at this time has to internalize as part of the mission, is to deal with these folks, help them to become whole economically, and create positive forward motion in terms of that. So the first thing I want to say is we have got to reinstate the eviction moratorium. It is absolutely critical. I will work to do that on a citywide level. What we can do locally is, the small property owner with one or two buildings is often somebody that you can speak to directly. And that's a commitment I would make for people who are in a six flat that's owned by a guy and he's only got a couple of properties, and you're a little bit behind, and he's giving you an eviction notice, or is saying he's going to give you an eviction notice even, that we can have a conversation. We can have a civil, positive, instructive conversation in many cases that helps to resolve that problem without that crisis, that burden of being evicted or having to move when you're economically not completely stable. With the bigger companies, it's, in my opinion, it's even easier, because if you've got a big developer with a big portfolio with hundreds of or thousands of units, they're going to want to keep building. They're going to want to keep acquiring. To do that, very, very often, they need cooperation with the aldermen. Well, to me, it is odd that so many aldermen and other public officials act as though these are unrelated things. They will play ball and help developers build and grow and get wealthier and wealthier, and then talk about evictions or foreclosures or other problems as if they're unrelated. We need to make sure that people that we're supporting are supporting us. And that means you do not get the endorsement of the Fifth Ward alderman, if I'm alderman, if you're evicting people at some kind of a outrageous rate, or if we're not able to work together when somebody is very behind on their rent, I need to see you cooperating with the residents who I represent in order for me to cooperate with you. And that's just the bottom line. So those are just some things we can do right away. I also think we need to be part of the solution around property taxes, which the latest property tax bill is stunning, stunning. People in our ward have double and triple what they were paying before on their latest bill, and only 30 days to pay it. We need to extend that period. We need to, in a hurry, come up with subsidies to help folks. We need an aggressive outreach program to work with seniors. Not all seniors know that they have freezes. There are other people who have ways they can mitigate their property tax bills, and they're just not aware of it. We need a very aggressive public education campaign for right now, and that also has to be a part of what we're doing going forward as a ward office. We have to be very good at giving people access to information. There's a particular group of people that I want to make mention of because I think there might be a unique approach that we can take for some people to ease some of the burden of property taxes right now. And those are the folks in the South Lakefront high rises. Those high rises have assessments that, there are historical reasons why they're as high as they are, but they are outrageously high. For a lot of people, they're paying more in an assessment than they're paying to live, whether it's their mortgage or if they're subletting from somebody. The assessment is a much larger part of the cost of being in that space. And we've got to do something for those folks. And I think that there's an abatement program that we could make the case for. So talking about maximizing public voice, I think there are two main elements that I want to address now. The first is really kind of simple and straightforward: participatory budgeting, which is something that was tried and failed by the sitting alderman. There was a lack of engagement. I think that doesn't reflect the desire of people in the ward to be a part of the process. I think it had to do with an ineffective sort of approach to outreach. And the second element is local development councils. This is something I've talked about in 2019 when I ran, and I'm interested in implementing councils that developers have to present in front of and get approval from in order to build in the community. These would be elected. They would have representatives from across the parts of the neighborhood that are in the Fifth Ward, and they would, in addition to overseeing development, they would be a hub for really a lot of other kind of deliberative processes. Not everything would be controlled by the councils. The councils would have an important voice in development, but other things, this could be a good space for people to have conversation about, whether it's park improvement or getting people involved in a local school. So I see these potentially as real democratic hubs. So these are two important elements. The other side of this is in the day-to-day operations of a ward office and in getting information out to residents. It's critical to have a feedback loop, and I think that's something that's been missing for a long time. So not only should we be very good at letting you know what's going on in the ward and in the city and communicating what matters to us and what we're making decisions about, but we should be getting information from you about what you care about, how you think we should be voting, what you think we should be prioritizing. And this is a place where I can say that I've had a lot of experience. I've advised political candidates, I've advised sitting elected officials, and I've advised civic organizations how to give and get information from constituencies. And I think it's something that you can look forward to if I'm elected, having a very comprehensive sort of approach to getting information out in all the ways that people like to receive information, tailoring those modes of communication to people's preferences and what the best ways are to reach out to them, but also getting information back in those channels wherever that's possible. And in that way, we'll be able to increase voice in a day-to-day sense. So there'll be these opportunities, budgeting, council oversight, where you'll be able to have more of a kind of a formal voice. But I also think that the civic life of any ward, of any community, is best thought about in terms of the day-to-day operation. It shouldn't be a special occasion when we are able to actively participate in the deliberative process of our community. That should be something that happens every day. So these are the 4 points on these particular hangers. We're going to be distributing these over the course of the next couple months leading up to the election. There will be different topics on them, and there will be an opportunity to come to the website and to see, sort of an elaborated explanation of them. And there's opportunity to give feedback. So we're hoping to sort of embody a lot of the things we're talking about. What I'll probably do with these videos is post them on Facebook, use social media as a way to get that feedback, but you'll also always be able to email me. You'll be able to call. There's a phone number on the site, and so you can give direct feedback in those ways or text. And let's just, continue to have this conversation, continue to engage me. If there are things that you hear here that you don't like or that you don't agree with, it's important to not only use that to help make your decision about who you're going to support as a candidate, but to consider the possibility that if there are other elements you do like, that maybe we can get a little closer in our view of a particular policy. Reach out to me. Let's take an opportunity to have conversation in this relatively short but important window of the municipal elections. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope to see you on the campaign trail.